And now, continuing on with our taste of Methodism, I want to share with you what is known as the Wesleyan Quadralateral, based on John Wesley's teachings of how we ought to think about our faith and learn about our faith and grow in our knowledge and understanding of our faith and God and what God requires of us. But there are 4 things we use to make decisions about what we believe. The first, of course, is Scripture. Scripture is the foundation. In the Bible, we find the stories of Jesus Christ, his ministry, his life, his death, his resurrection, and we can access those as the primary source. Even in the 21st century, we can go back and see what Jesus taught and what he said. So they serve as a foundation for what we believe. We believe that Scripture contains everything you need to know Jesus Christ. That if you were on a deserted island and there was just a Bible and no one else or nothing else there, that by reading the Bible, there would be enough information in there for you to come into a relationship with Jesus Christ and understand the nature and the desire of God to be in a relationship with us. But Scripture sometimes can be difficult to understand. And so we rely then on tradition to help us interpret not just what the Scripture says, but what it means. For instance, Jesus said, literally, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. And yet, throughout Christian history, there has never been a sect of Christians who have been one-eyed and one-armed. So obviously, we know that Jesus Christ wasn't speaking literally when he said, pluck your eye out or cut your hand off. That he was getting our attention to demonstrate to us just how serious sin can be and how it separates us from our relationship with God and how important that is. But we learn that through tradition, through the teaching and guidance of Christians throughout the centuries who have understood what God has been trying to say. Tradition isn't simply just the teachings of the church, but tradition can be your pastor you had when you were young, or a youth pastor, or a Sunday school teacher, or your mother, or father, or grandmother, whoever it might be that helped you understand what God was trying to do in this world. The truth is that we can also become a Christian without ever reading the Bible. Most Christians throughout history have been this way. That if we have someone who is willing to share their faith and show their faith to us, we can also come into a saving relationship with Jesus Christ. But tradition isn't primary. When tradition conflicts with Scripture or seems to conflict with Scripture, Scripture again is our primary source. But tradition is critically important for us to understand our faith. So is our reason. We are thinking, intelligent human beings. God created us that way. I think it's part of the image he wanted to instill in us, was to be creative and to think. And so when things don't make sense, like, does Jesus, the one who loved us and cared for us and called us to love ourselves and love God, would he really want us to pluck our eyes out and cut our hands off? It just doesn't make sense. And so we think about that and we question that and we try to come to understanding of that, and we realize that Jesus used that kind of teaching often where he, they call it hyperbole, where he make an example or he would exaggerate something to get your attention, to help you understand how important it is to not sin and to stay in a relationship with God. But again, our reason is limited. We don't know everything. Even as a group, we don't know everything. I certainly, as an individual, don't know everything there is to know. So if I base my faith and my understanding on who God is and what he requires simply on my thinking ability or my knowledge ability, I'm limited. So again, we seek Scripture. And we seek tradition, those who have gone before us, to help us understand more about our faith. And finally, we use our own experiences. Experience is a very powerful teaching tool. You can attest to that. You have learned most of the things, life lessons you have learned through experience. And many of those tough experiences or difficult experiences. In the Bible, the book of Hebrews is written to a group of Christians who are being persecuted. And the author tells them not to give up, to continue to stick together. And because they did that, they learned things about themselves, and they learned something about the power of God, not just to deal with us or help us in good times, but how powerful God's presence can be in the midst of a community of faith, even in the most difficult of times. And through that experience, their witness then has carried for generations and generations. Our experiences tell us a lot about this world, what's good, what's bad, what makes sense and what doesn't. But again, just as with reason, it's limited. I'm only going to live a certain amount of time. And I can only be at one place at one time. There are many things in this world that I will never experience. And so to base my understanding of God and my understanding of what he requires simply on my experience is not enough. I must rely on the teachings of Christians who have gone before me and the Scripture as a foundation of my faith. But if you use all four of these things, they're incredibly powerful and incredibly helpful in understanding what it is we believe about God and what it is we believe God requires of us, the two fundamental basics of our religion and our faith.